Welcome to my woodworking shop. I'm Cindy Drozda. What I'm most known for in the wood turning world is my lidded vessels with finials. And I do lidded vessels in natural wood color. I also color my vessels, and what I'd like to show you today is this coloring process that I use. Get some really stunning results. I also love to make things out with natural edge. And so the bowl that I'm going to make now is the bowl part of a piece like this one. And I'll show you my coloring process at the same time. So I've got my burl blank here. I've already cut the blank. And you can see that I have a Forstner drilled hole on the center so that my live center and drive center don't have to try to seat themselves on this uneven surface. I'll show you now how I drill that Forstner hole safely on my burl natural edge bowl blank. I'm going to clamp the bowl blank in a hand screw, and then I'm going to clamp the hand screw to the drill press table. This way I will have the piece secure, because trying to drill with a Forstner in an uneven natural edge piece like that is really asking for trouble unless you clamp it down. So please do not try to drill with a Forstner bit into a natural edge burl bowl blank on the drill press without clamping it down. Now clamp the hand screw to the table, securing the bowl blank there, and got it lined up, yeah, okay, and I just drill, advancing the drill bit very slowly until I have basically a flat area that I can put my live and drive center in, or this is going to be on the drive center end. So since I've balanced this blank to have the rim of the bowl be centered up on that hole, I'm going to put the drive center in the hole that I just did, and I'll bring up the tailstock to the center on the other side. Okay, and the first thing I'll do is work on possibly balancing the natural edge a little more. Since I'm using a natural edge piece just between centers, I'm going to take the extra precaution of wearing a face shield. So we'll turn the lathe on with the speed control all the way down to nothing, and then I'll advance it, speed it up, while cranking on the tailstock hand wheel to be sure that I'm getting good pressure between centers. I did not tighten the tailstock ram, the tightener for the ram here, because I want to be able to reach over and get feedback from the tailstock hand wheel as to whether I've got the piece tight between centers. Okay, that looks good, and I'll just true up the blank now. Once it's round, I can begin that process of refining my natural edge balance. So what I'm looking for here is I'm looking for areas that are closer to the headstock. Call that a high point. Is there any other high point on here? Here's another one. Okay, or a low point, which is closer to the tailstock. I'm going to take right about there. So there's a low point there. And I'm going to then look at what's directly on the other side of that. Well, it's a little higher. So what I'll do first now is I will take this low area here and I will move it up. So I'm taking the tailstock out and I'm going to shift so that the point of the tailstock gets moved. While I moved the piece, I shifted the piece toward the headstock. so that this area will now be closer to the headstock and the opposite side will be a little further away. So now we'll turn it up again, see what we got. All the way down to 0, face shield on, cranking on the tailstock hand wheel, turn it on and start cranking up the speed. The faster I can spin the piece, the better, the easier, the smoother the cuts will be. But I do want to spin my piece at a safe speed. So the rule of thumb that I use on something like that is, if it scares me, it's too fast. If the lathe's bouncing around, it's too fast. I'm actually repositioning the tailstock point about a 1/16 of an inch, and I use these stub centers with the retractable point because they give me easy repositioning of my piece between centers. I'm not moving the headstock point at all. The headstock point was where I centered up the piece on the rim that I was intending to be in my bowl. So I'm not going to want to move that. Okay, so here's a high point. Directly opposite is not quite as high. I think what I'll do is take this point and I'll move it away from the headstock. So I'm repositioning again, and I'm moving the tailstock center point about a 1/16 of an inch each time on a piece like this. This piece is about a 5-inch, 4.5-inch bowl blank. And now I'll true it up again. True it up again. And I'm going to make a cut in at kind of the angle I'm planning to cut when I create my natural edge bowl. Now, you can really, let's get a little bit closer. You can really see how some of the pieces of the edge are sticking out further past this baseline, this cut, than others. And that one is sticking out by far the most right here. So I'm going to move that back toward the tailstock, lower it if you will. And we'll make another cut right in on that line. That's going to be the shape of the wall of the bowl. All right, I'm going to say this looks good. Okay, as soon as I like it, think it looks good, then I can begin to cut my chucking tenon. Okay, so you can see how I cut close to the tail center with my bowl gouge, and that gives me a mark for where the center of all of those marks was. See it here, concentric with the tailstock. Okay, so I've got my tenon done, but it needs a bit of refinement. So what I'm going to do is just take this, it's basically a scraper with an angle on it, and I'm going to undercut the shoulders slightly and dovetail that tenon so that I can put it in my chuck. Okay, I'll put the piece in the chuck and tighten it up. And I think I will just bring up the tailstock for safety. Why not? It's not in the way. Okay, and I'll get started on the outside of the bowl. Alright, so now I'm going to make a final cut to create the shape of the outside of the bowl. Notice how I was going kind of fast until I got to that outside shape last cut there. And I'm going to up the speed a little bit here too, because the faster you spin the piece, the more it acts like a solid piece of wood, and the cleaner the cuts tend to be. So I want to make sure that I'm clearing the tool rest all the way around. Good idea. I'm working on the inside of the bowl now. Inside of the bowl. And we could maybe zoom a little more. So I want to have the tailstock or the tool rest set so that if I have the bowl gouge on the center line, the tool rest would be right supporting it. So it needs to come up quite a bit there. We'll turn the lathe on and hollow out the inside of the bowl. Okay, so I started at the rim and got the wall thickness where I want it. And now I'm going to work lower down in the bowl. See how we're doing for our depth at the moment. So here's a way that I use for checking the depth of a natural edge piece. You know, I use this kind of a depth gauge, but you really can't get a good reading trying to measure off of the rim of a natural edge uneven bowl like this. So what I'm going to do is I'll put my tool rest perpendicular to the bed, and then I'll use the tool rest to measure the depth from. And moving over here, now I'll take my ruler and put it parallel to the depth gauge, and that'll tell me where the bottom of the piece is. I'm just checking because I want to leave enough for a little foot, and I don't want to go through the bottom. We never really want to go through the bottom. So here is a negative rake scraper. This is a symmetrical beveled, double bevel scraper. It's not a skew, it's just a dedicated scraper. It has the same bevel on the top and the bottom with an included angle of 50 degrees. That means that if I was to take my protractor and measure across the two bevel angles, I would get a 50-degree angle. That's a 50-degree included angle. And it's a negative rake scraper, and I want to set my tool rest so that I'm cutting right about on center. And I'm going to take just a skimming cut to smooth out the surface, smooth out the gouge ripples, refine the shape. It's mainly a finishing tool, but I am using it at the moment to actually remove material, and it could use a sharpening as well. So when I've smoothed out the surface to my satisfaction, I have my surface prepared for the coloring technique. Now I'm going to do the first step in this coloring process that I use. And what that is I'm taking advantage of the fact that the penetrating alcohol-based transparent color that I use is going to soak into the wood. And it'll soak in deeper into the end grain than into the side grain. So this really only works with burls, because in a burl, the end grain and the side grain are all mixed up together. So what will happen is I will put my first color on, and that's going to be black. Wearing gloves to protect my hands. I've got this trans tint dye diluted to about 16 to 1 it's a concentrate and it's intended to be diluted. What I'm about to do next is take another cut, which means that what I'm doing is putting black on, and the black's going to soak into the wood, and it's going to soak in deeper into the end grain areas of the burl than into the side grain areas. So when I cut some of that off, I'll cut a layer of wood off now with my negative rake scraper. And that means that I'm cutting down the area the dye penetrated into, so the dye will only be left visible in the areas of deepest penetration. So to sand this piece on the inside, I could use a drill-mounted sanding pad, but really this is such a tiny bowl that I think the sanding pad is really too big. And I'm just going to use a piece of sandpaper on my hand and sand it, holding the sandpaper against the wood, making very, very sure that I do not get my fingers involved with that natural edge. Sanding like that, holding the paper against the wood, is a great way to sand the area that doesn't have the natural edge. But wherever this natural edge, interrupted part, sticks out past the full uninterrupted part of the bowl, I need to sand it a little bit differently. And here's the way I'm going to do it. The inside of the bowl is now done. So I'm going to do the outside on a jam block, a friction drive block. Before I take the piece out of the chuck, if I want to, I could take a little more away from the bottom of the bowl, the bottom area on the outside, just because it's kind of easier to do when I have the piece in the chuck instead of just on the jam chuck. Oh. So it's thin down there. It's thinner up here. So that'll be good for this stage of things. I'll take a little bit, perhaps more wood out of here. Here's a jam chuck. This is a piece that I've used before for a very similar shape of piece. So it's already formed, but I'll have to do some refining of it so that I can mount this bowl on there and have the shape of the jam block roughly conform to the inside shape of the bowl. And I've got the jam block larger than my bowl so that the entire natural edge will be supported. When I check the shape, I need to have the tailstock up, because without the tailstock up, I don't really know how well it's conforming or not. I'm not really intending this to conform perfectly to the shape of the inside of the bowl. What I'm wanting is just for it to support the rim area. So that's looking good. I'll bring up my tailstock, and I've got good contact with this jam block all in the rim area here. So I didn't, and this was kind of an oversight, I didn't check my wall thickness. So I am going to need to take this piece off the jam block, and every time I take the piece off the jam block and put it back on, I'm going to get a little bit of wobble. It's not going to come perfectly true every time. So I've got about a 3/16 right there. I've got a little bit less in here. It's as thin as I would ever care for it to be. Most of the upper part. And in the bottom, I've got about 5/8 of an inch. So I'm planning to make a little foot on the bottom. That gives me a good idea of how much I can do here. And I'm also thinking I would like to smooth out that surface, because when I'm pressing on it with the tailstock, I risk imprinting the wood of the jam block into the soft maple of my bowl. More refinement of the shape here. And I'll use my small bowl gouge to work on that foot. Give the foot a little chamfer on the bottom. Undercut it at the bottom there. And I'll use my spindle gouge now to come in and shape right up next to that foot there. So just like the inside, now for the coloring thing, I'm going to use the negative rake scraper and scrape a smooth surface on the whole outside shape. This is refining the curve, smoothing out the surface. There where I have a concave area, I'm using this radius scraper, the arc scraper, and where I have a convex surface, I'll use this 50-50 scraper, which is an angled pointy scraper that gets into that area where the foot comes up to the bottom of the bowl, gets in there really nicely. So I've got a negative rake scrape surface on all places. All cleaned up. Okay, that's looking good. Now, the same color process that I used on the inside, starting with the black dye. I'm going to cover the outside with black, and then I'm going to scrape away the outer layer, leaving dye only in the areas of deepest penetration, the end grain areas. Negative rake scrape to get the top layer of color off. On the concave part, I'm using the arc scraper. Down at the base, I use the 50-50 scraper. I'm slowing way down for the sanding. I'll just hold the paper against the piece, and maybe we'll start with 240 and then go through 400, 600, 1000, 2000. So all sanded, and I'm going to put more color on when I take it off the lathe. So before I take it off the lathe, I'm going to finish off the very bottom. There is nothing holding this piece on the lathe other than the tailstock. So if I was to take away the tailstock, the piece would basically fall off. Yet I want to take away the tailstock because I want to have a completely finished bottom look to the piece. So if I tape it on here, last wrap of tape around the ends, now I should be able to work it down to removing the tailstock, and the piece will stay on my jam chuck. Speed things up plenty, and I'll start with my spindle gouge and light cuts. Getting up close to that tailstock. Maybe I'll go this way. Yeah, that's working out better. Cutting more like a side grain piece than an end grain piece. I get all close to where, well, it all disappeared, but my plan was to get down to where there was only 1/8 of an inch left, and then to take away the tailstock completely. Slow it down, sand the bottom. And now I'm done with this piece in terms of the first step of the coloring, and all of the turning is done. So now I get to have some real fun with color. I'm using still these little pieces of paper towel to put the color on, and I'm really just going to daub it on however I want to, and I'll start with one of the colors I'm going to use. I'm using blue and green here, and I'm going to do some, basically just put some color on. Look good. I'm looking at this one and I'm thinking, you know, I really probably should have scraped off more of the black because it's going to be kind of dark. So now I put green everywhere that there wasn't blue and overlap the green a little as well. Lots of things can be done here with the color and the rim. Sometimes I will make the rim black like this. Another thing I like to do is put gold leaf on the rim. So here I now have some green and blue kind of modeled together. It's a little heavy on the green, I think, so I'm going to put on more blue over the top of some of those green areas. Now what I will do is try to blend them further using a spray bottle of denatured alcohol. And I can spray the alcohol on, and it kind of causes the colors to run together. Another thing it does is sometimes pools in the bottom. I'm not going to rub, I'm going to blot the alcohol off if I think I need to. Process. So here's my piece, and I will finish it further with a Waterlox oil finish, and then I'll sign the bottom with my engraver and fill it in with gold. And there we are. Thank you very much.